we're here at Google offices. We're talking about creating happy workplaces. You've made a presentation to us earlier, so perhaps just start by telling us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, well, I'm Mark Williamson. I run Action for Happiness. It's a movement of people from a very wide range of sort of backgrounds and walks of life, from business leaders to mums and dads to community leaders to policymakers to health practitioners and anyone in between, really. So the thing that unites these people is a passion that happiness and well-being really matter. They matter to us as individuals, the way we approach our lives, the way we are in our families and communities. They also matter to our organisations in terms of productivity and creativity and so on. And they matter to what we should care about for our political leaders. What matters most for our country may not be growing the economy, it may actually be trying to do what we can to improve human well-being. So our organisation is all about that idea of a vision of a happier society where we have better relationships, greater well-being, and we make that our focus. And we have a sort of network of members, maybe 90,000 or so people in this part of our face-to-face and online communities now that are doing various things that support that mission. And we work in organisations, we work in schools, we work in community groups, and we just generally get people talking about these issues. And crucially, talking is the starting point there, because as our name Action for Happiness suggests, this is about what can we actually do to be happier.
Yeah, do you think is Action for Happiness is a science? Is it a discipline? I think we've heard a little bit about sort of behavioural science. Where do you think it sits?
Well, happiness conceptually has been in the realm of philosophy, spirituality, grandmotherly wisdom for millennia. And the thing that's changed in the last perhaps 15, maybe 20 years is that alongside that great wisdom, there's now empirical evidence about what really does make for a flourishing life. So we now can say with a bit more certainty what really makes us happy. Now, in fact, in many cases that evidence, if you like, when you road test the ancient wisdom, a lot of it does really well. A lot of things we've been told for years that are important for our happiness stack up. But some things don't actually. So we now have a more empirical base to say what really makes for a good life. And guess what? There's no 10 commandments. We're all unique human beings. There's no magic source for happiness, but there are some principles that come up again and again in research, in practical lived experience, that are important. So I can give you a few examples of those things. So we know fundamentally that human relationships are vital for our happiness and well-being, whether that's our nearest and dearest relationships, which matter most at home, our relationships with our colleagues, we've been talking about a lot today, our relationships in the community. That connection, we're a deeply social species. If we don't have connection and positive relationships, then we're deeply troubled people, actually, because it's so fundamental. That's one thing. Another thing that's vital is our kind of sense of kind of emotional, mental well-being, the inner life, if you like. So often we're concerned about the outer life, the house, the job, the possessions. What goes on inside our heads is deeply important, and obviously driven by our genetics and our family environments, but it's also driven by the conscious choices we make, the way we treat each other, the way we treat ourselves. And so what we've been talking about today is some of the bits of evidence that show that kind of almost regardless of our life to date and our circumstances, what can you do, how can we learn to think, behave and live in ways that are better for our well-being? And actually, how do we take those ideas into workplaces and actually improve well-being?
Okay, Henry's talked today about creating some sort of happiness movement. Maybe that feeds into, I think there was a kind of World Day of Happiness or some such that you were recently involved in. Perhaps you kind of tell us a bit about that and how that might link in.
Encouragingly, there's lots of these kind of trends we're seeing now that more and more people are talking about happiness seriously in policy terms, in organisational terms. We're hearing Google, of course, which is a pioneer in creating happy organisations and really seeing great success linked to that. The day you mentioned is the very first United Nations International Day of Happiness, happened on the 20th of March. And it came from a fascinating process involving world leaders, and Ban Ki-moon is the head of the UN, getting together and saying, we need a new kind of paradigm for success and measuring progress. Not just GDP as a measure of progress, but well-being as a measure of progress. Now, it's early days in that process. The UK and some other countries are measuring the nation's well-being now, as well as measuring the economy, but we're a long way away from actually building our priorities about that. But so the day is, I'm always a bit sceptical about days. You have Day for this and Pancake Day and Let's Support Trees Day and many wonderful initiatives, but does a day really make a difference? And actually what we found was a day was a brilliant way of having a conversation with people about what matters most, what really makes for a happy life. And so we saw activity around the world, we saw political discussion, we saw TV coverage, we saw trending on Twitter. So I just get this sense that people are asking, especially in the current climate, what is a good life all about? And actually happiness is at the heart of that.
Yeah. I've just spoken with Dom, and he talked about an idea he introduced in his workplace that he borrowed from you, I think, which was this weekly email to ask people whether they're feeling happy or not, or whatever, which he follows up on. Is it very much that you do borrow good ideas from each other and within the sort of world of happiness?
Yes, I think that's right. So I think it's the magic sauce is a mixture of things that have come out of empirical research, things that have been tried and tested and shown to work, but adapted for the fact that you, like any good communication, you need to know who are you talking to about what. So some of the loveliest ideas have been changed completely from a school classroom to a corporate environment. But some of them are universal, and one of the things that we just mentioned briefly today that is so universal is this idea of focusing on the good things. We're, as we described in today's presentation, we're sort of hardwired to focus on the negative. It's part of our evolutionary heritage. We would never have survived on the savannah if we didn't know how to get out of the way of a dangerous beast. And yet, in modern life, that means that so often we focus on the problems today, the risks tomorrow, the fears, the things that have gone wrong, the things we're not good enough at. And that has a really damaging effect on our psyche, and in fact, little subtle changes like each day noticing what's gone well, spending time in our team meetings focusing on what's been good and not what's bad, asking our children how their day's been in a positive frame of mind, just reframing the questions we ask each other, not so much what's the problem today, more what's gone well today. That sounds so simple, and it is simple, but it has a much more profound impact than I think we realise.
Do you have any sort of personal tips on how you make today a happy day? What do you do sort of by way of routine or habit?
Well, before personal tips, one thing we did at Action for Happiness at the start was to say, what does the research say and how can we make it engaging? So we've created something called the 10 Keys to Happier Living, which isn't a 10 Commandments, it's a sort of framework of things that tend to really help. Visit actionforhappiness.org and you'll see all of that wealth of evidence. They include a whole range of things, and I'll touch on a few to answer the question. So from a personal perspective, I find that when I connect with people, those days are days that are much happier than days when I'm more isolated, when I'm reading, when I'm emailing, when I'm inward looking. So that backs up this idea of even simple human connections, using the checkout rather than the face-to-face checkout, not the automated checkout. These little chances to connect with people, we should take those more seriously. Obviously, physical exercise we know is great for our physical health, but we forget sometimes how great it is for our mental health, our sense of feeling good. So it doesn't need to be running every day, but a walk instead of taking the tube. Any chance to be outside to get a bit more active, great for our, kind of how we feel. The thing that we focus on a lot with Action for Happiness is about our happiness being linked to others. So in fact, one of the best things we can do to be happy is to care more for others and do things for them. If you want to feel good, do good is our kind of ethos. And so whether it's a little act of kindness, whether it's volunteering for a charity, whether it's making your whole working life led by a cause or a mission, from the small to the big, if we can do things that put other people's happiness first, that's about the best way to not just help them, but help us too.